doing? So, I call this story The Perfect Orange. And by a little bit of background, Seth mentioned that for 18 years, I was in a past life, I was the editor and then publisher of Backpacker Magazine, the magazine of wilderness travel. And we had a staff of about 30 people, and they were scattered all over the country. So a couple times a year, we took a chance to really hike our own talk, so to speak. So we'd have staff trips. And we'd usually look for some pretty remote places to have those trips because we wanted to make sure we got caught up with each other. So they usually involved about anywhere from 4 or 5 days to a couple weeks. And in this case, we went to Big Bend National Park. And Big Bend, anybody been to Big Bend? A few people? Okay. It's the least visited national park in our system, for good reason. It's also one of the largest, it's actually the largest in the lower 48. It was established in 1944. It's right down on the border between Texas and Mexico, so it's about as far south in the United States as you can go. And there's something about Texas. Do we have any Texans here? Okay, a few Texans. It's a really big place. I mean, it is really big. And for those of us who live here in New England, it's also relatively featureless. At least that's what it would appear that way. And I got a good taste of just how big it is and just how featureless it is. You fly into El Paso, that's probably the closest airport to Big Bend that you can find, and the drive down Interstate 10 is about as straight and as flat as I've ever experienced and probably ever will experience again. And I had a good sense of that because it was after dusk when we got onto the interstate. And I've never had this experience before, but you're looking out at the street, at the headlights coming at you out there in the distance, and you realize those are the same headlights that have been coming at you for about a half hour. And they're not getting any closer. And that's Texas. So it was 330 miles. That's basically the distance between here and Albany, or here and a little bit beyond Quebec City. It's a long way. So it was an interminable drive, but we got there. And we got into Big Bend National Park, which is, it's a place that there's been human history there for over 10,000 years. It's the Comanche, the Chizos, and the Apache most recently. It's a very wild place. We decided to take the Outer Mountain Loop Trail as our trip, which is one of the more rugged, challenging trips and tours in the park. And it ends on a trail called the Datsun Trail, which I'll come back to. But you start in the mountains, about 5,000 feet up, so it's relatively cool. And then you drop down after about 3 days into the vast Chihuahuan Desert. The Chihuahuan Desert spans, it starts in Arizona and goes all the way through West Texas and down into Mexico. It's a very, very large, dry area. It is pure desert. So the trick is to rise early, beat the heat as best you can, and just pray for cloud cover, because you do not want to be out there without clouds. And unfortunately, by the 4th day, the prayers stopped working. We were down out of the mountains, we were in the Chihuahuan Desert, and it was the sun at full force. We had spread out, and I paired up with one of the elders of the group. Figure I'd take sort of a gentle pace going up into a very, very large box canyon that ended in a trail that goes up into the Chizos. And that was sort of the only comforting thought I had that day, pretty much. I forgot to mention that we're also carrying a lot of our own water, because on a trip like that, there is no water out there. In fact, we had to catch about 2 gallons for each person halfway through. So because you're carrying water, it weighs a lot. So your pack is usually about 60 pounds, give or take. And that's pretty much at the limit of what's comfortable and what's tolerable for all-day hiking. And one of the benefits of that, if there is a benefit, would be, well, you get a little bit of shade out of it. It's a big pack. And if you kind of arch your back after, a long day of sweating, the air can kind of circulate behind there. Kind of. Am I right? You're right. Kind of cools it off a little bit. So anyway, the last day we dropped down in the Datsun Trail, and the sun was at full force, as I said. It was mid-July, by the way, so it was plenty hot. We're heading up and into the desert now for real. And in the desert, they say that everything either sticks, stings, or bites. It's really true. It's really true. And by now, the ground, of course, is also heating up. And so it's starting to cook us. It's sort of, you get that feeling like, you're walking across in a grill that's on top of burners at full force, because your feet are heating up, but it's not because your feet are rubbing inside your boots. They're literally heating from the outside of the soles up. So it's plenty hot. Your mouth's parched, and all these insects are going by, rubbing their body parts together, bloating their stomachs, anything, it seemed, that would make noise. It was really incessant. I mean, you're going along, and of course you got the usual rattlesnakes hissing at you, which seemed to be like under every bush, or at least you had to think that way. And then tarantulas do this thing I've learned called stridulating, which is a little hissing sound. So just about any bug, any insect out there seems to have a sound. It was incessant, and it only grew as the heat grew with the day. So it was definitely what I'd consider comparable to Dante's Inferno, if there ever was such a thing. So finally, in late afternoon, we got to that fork in the Datsun Trail that finally leads back up into the Chisos Mountains. And the noise had subsided, and our day of swimming in sweat, where we probably easily lost a gallon each of water and fluids, our skin that wasn't covered in trail dust was pretty much caked in our own salt by that time. And there was a nice little, I remember there was a small leafy walnut tree right there. And it was really the first shade we had found in probably about 10 miles. We were definitely exposed, but we stopped to rest. And that's when I remembered, deep inside my pack, I had an orange. An orange. It was just an orange, but it was there. It was there exactly for an occasion like this. So I grabbed this orange. And I still remember it even today. It was like, 15 some years ago now. And I remember breaking the skin on that orange, and you get that little burst of citrus, in your nostrils. It's kind of like smelling the ocean for the first time when you've been away. Only this ocean was sort of like in Florida in the middle of some orange grove. But we split it in half, and I gave half to my hiking partner, Skip. And it was actually cold to the touch compared to where we were. I remember biting into it, wallowing in that experience. It was like way more than the sum of the vitamin C and calcium that was in there. This was fleshy, soft, succulent orange. Like I'd never tasted it. I took little bites, savoring every little piece of it. It was, I'll bet we probably took a half an hour to eat that half of orange. And we could have taken longer. Finally, I turned to Skip and I said, Skip, this orange, this is the perfect orange. Right then, in that place, in that moment, I simply could imagine anywhere ever having an orange that tasted as good as that orange did right there at that time. And I doubt I ever will. Thank you.